Thank you for the lovely intro, and we're happy to be here. My name is Fredrik, I'm from Bitwig, and today we're going to talk about, as Tim already mentioned, the integration of Bitwig Studio with hardware, namely Eurorack systems and analog synthesizers. It's going to be a very specific workshop today. We're not going to talk about all the different things that Bitwig Studio can do. You know, like how we handle plugins, or how you can edit audio, or how you can collaborate with other people, what the library is about. That's not going to be part of what's going to be shown today. We're only going to focus on the hardware integration and a few different things that you can do with that. I've been making music myself since the mid-90s. I started with trackers, and I've gone through lots of different DAWs. I mostly worked in the box. I've been with Bitwig for about 5 years, and ever since I started with Bitwig Studio, I can honestly say that my music production have changed a lot, especially with the release of version 2, which was 2 years ago, where we had a lot of this CV hardware integration stuff. And that kind of pushed me into this tangent of getting into modular. And I have this system here today, which is the kind of result of all this journey that I'm on. And yeah, that's what we're gonna show here today. Bitwig Studio 2 was released 2 years ago, like I said, and it featured a lot of different kind of CV tools. You can send out clock, you can send out CV, you can send out gate, and send back into Bitwig Studio. That's all happening kind of in the in what we call the device panel, which is down below. Yeah, the screen is up there. So down below you have our device panel, which consists of usually the instruments and audio effects, note effects, things like that. The signal flow is from left to right, and what you see here is phase 4, which is our kind of flagship synthesizer with 4 oscillators, followed by a bunch of audio effects. So we will look at all that, and I will kind of explain what I'm doing when I'm building my different device chains. Later on, we will also look at the grid, which is our modular sound design environment that we released with Bitwig Studio 3, which came out earlier this year. I don't want to look at that now. We'll look at that later. It's a really fun environment to work with in its own, to build synthesizers or drum machines or effects, but also how it connects with the hardware, which is... I don't think the microphone is on at all, actually. So it's just for the people in the video later. So yeah. By the way, if you're watching this on video in the future, greetings from the past. I hope the future is not as crappy as everyone fears it is. And yeah, so I can explain my setup real quick. Starting with this piece, this is a Microsoft Surface Studio, which is a giant touchscreen computer, which is great to have in demonstrations like this, because you can work with big movements and it looks very dramatic. But it's also fun to work with touch, because it's a really fun way to work with software. This is in turn connected to this machine here, which is of course a Eurorack system, containing of a bunch of different modules. We have a few sequencers, a couple of different modulators like envelopes, LFOs, some oscillators, really kick-ass filter. And of course this piece here, which is the ES8, is an audio interface, USB class compliant. It has 8 analog outputs and 4 analog inputs. They are what's called DC coupled, which makes a lot of sense in this environment, because that means that they are perfect for controlling modules using CV. This is in turn connected to the mixer, and I'm sending out actually 2 stereo tracks out to the mixer, and that's why I'll be kind of grabbing here back and forth during the presentation. I thought of this workshop not like a masterclass or like a boring talky demonstration. It's more going to be me doing a bunch of different examples of how I kind of yeah, my techniques on how I would make music using these two things together. And it's gonna be improvised. It's gonna be starting from scratch almost every time, and you just have to gonna bear with me in those passages that might not make musical sense. But I'm sure we're gonna have fun anyway together. Okay, maybe just a few simple words about Bitwig Studio, if we can bring that up on the screen. As I mentioned, you have the device chain down below. Up here we have what we call the clip launcher, which is essentially like a sketch pad or a place to have your loops, your scenes, and you can you can work in a non-linear way and don't have to worry about the timeline at all. And on the right hand side we have a classic timeline, an arrangement with all your material. We're probably not going to use that so much today. We also have the different tracks here aligned in a nice order. They have different content. Obviously, we'll have some instruments and some audio here somewhere as well. Let me just select that and bring up the editor so we can see it. Yeah. And you'll see that Bitwig Studio is kind of flexible in the way that you can load different content and put them together. So I'm rambling already. So just a few more points before we get started, just so you kind of know what I'm doing when I'm doing things, because so I'm not too fast, so you can't follow. I'm going to bring up what we call the pop-up browser, which is essentially a browser that pops up. And this is the way to insert instruments, to insert effects, to kind of bring stuff into the project. And I can show you real quick just an example. So I'm going to load to the right hand side, by the way, I have all the different devices. I'm going to load a polysynth. So if I'm going back to the device chain, this is now a very naked, bare bone kind of instrument track, if you will. It consists of one boring polysynth, which plays a very simple sound. Let's see, I'm gonna stop the sound and gonna use this on-screen keyboard to play some sound. Let's see. Yeah. I think you can follow when I play, right? You can see that nicely. I could have like a normal Midi keyboard or something connected, but I just want to keep it simple. I'm just gonna keep playing on this keyboard. So this is a very simple patch. It's a standard subtractive synthesizer with two oscillators, a filter, and a little bit of everything. Doesn't have any effects, doesn't have any LFOs, doesn't have anything of that. And that's kind of the philosophy behind Bitwig Studio, is to keep things modular. So the building blocks are simple and stripped down, and you can simply add the things you want to enrich the instrument in a very flexible way. So that brings us to the modulation system. So you'll see that every device in Bitwig Studio has this modulator panel that you can fold out. I'm just going to hit the plus button here, and you'll see again another pop-up browser showing me all the different modulators that are available. I'm going to go ahead and choose the classic LFO, and I've now loaded a classic LFO into the polysynth. I have some settings for that I can fold out, and I also have this assign modulation button, I think it's called. And when I hit that, you'll see that all the different parameters turn a little bit bluish. That means that I can assign them. I'm just going to go ahead and start assigning a little bit of modulation to a bunch of different parameters, just to show you how easy it is and how flexible it is. I can assign any number of parameters, any amount, in any direction, and I can immediately see what's happening. Let's undo that. And things start to move nicely. And that's not only pretty, it's also very helpful, because I know what's going on and I know the different movements. So if I play a note, you'll hear that the sound is moving and things are happening. And the reason I'm showing this is because together, the modulation system, together with this stuff, is awesome. So we'll get back to that later. Yeah, so I think we can start with a bunch of different techniques, different use cases or different scenarios. And if there's anything that's unclear, if I'm too fast or too slow or whatever, just raise your hand or stomp your feet or whatever you need to do to stop me and ask me any questions. Yeah? So, starting with a new project, starting from blank. I'm gonna set up super simple little loop here, because I think many people who are here in Schneider's Laden work with hardware a lot, and that's the starting point. So I'm just gonna go ahead and patch things while you watch. It's not at all uncomfortable. So it's a very simple little patch with a filter and a little reverb for niceness, and one oscillator played by a sequencer called Mux Slicer from Befaco. Actually skip that. I'm gonna go straight to the source here. So we should be getting some sound. Yeah. And gonna patch this up. So the reason I'm actually starting from scratch is just because for me personally, when I watch people do stuff, it gets super super confusing when there's a lot of things already patched up. So I'm just doing this manually in front of you, just so people who are less experienced can kind of follow and see actually how to do something from scratch. Now, I'm not a professional by any means. I just happen to do this a lot in my own time. So I'll bring this up here. So a very simple patch. So if you're working with this stuff, maybe you want to record it into the computer, yeah? The way I've set this up is via a aux. Let's see if I can do that here. I'm just going to choose my input here in the in the audio. So maybe you can see that up there. You're getting a signal in the audio track. And this is now just audio played. It's not synced up to my project in any way. That's the next step. So just so we have something to reference, I'm gonna play us a little drum clip that I have here. I'm gonna up the BPM. Let's see how this sounds. So they're not synced up in any way. By the way, I should mention there's no Midi here involved at all. That's interesting. What's the word I'm looking for? There are certain advantages to that. Let me put it that way, and I'll demonstrate that at a later stage. So anyway, I have this drum loop and I have this I have this little loop going on, and I want to sync it up. So going back to the computer screen, please. I'm gonna use the first instrument track, and I'm gonna load up a device called clock out. Now this sends out analog clock as through my audio outputs, and I'm gonna choose the next available one, which is number 3. And if you switch to the camera, it's hard to see, but there's some blinking going on here in port number 3. So I'm sending out the pulse here, And I'm just gonna patch that up to the clock in of my mux slicer. Okay, syncs. And number 4 is my reset, so I'm gonna put that here. Turn it up a little bit. Oh, do it here. So now it syncs, and I can start doing recording, or I can start doing different things with the melody. And I'm just gonna capture the melody right now as it is. So if we go back to the screen, I'm just gonna hit record on this clip. So it's captured, and let's have a look. You'll see if everything goes as planned. Well, it's not perfect, but it's pretty damn close, and you can do different settings to kind of make things super tight. Again, working outside Midi, this is all in the audio realm, meaning that everything is on point and super high quality, super high resolution signal. So I'm gonna bring down the clock here because it's a bit too fast. Okay, so that's a very kind of basic loop. Maybe I want to enrich it by some, I can either, do the manual movement, or I can show you how I can control the hardware from the software. That's why we're here, right? So in my hardware instrument chain, I'm gonna add another device, which is called CV out. You don't like it? Yeah? I'm joking, of course. I know you like it. Yeah. All right, so we're on the screen now. So I've just added this CV out, which is a super basic device, which is essentially just a software knob that I can send out control voltages. So I need to select an output, and the next one available is number 5. So let's patch up number 5 to something. And of course we're gonna patch it to the cutoff of the filter, because that's what one does. Now I have software control over my hardware filter in a quite a nice and neat way. And that means that I can start doing things on the computer side to record. So I can, for instance, start recording. Actually, no, I'm not gonna record. I'm gonna do an automation clip. Get away. There we go. And I'm gonna do some automation write action. Whoops. Oh, my mistake. I'm in the wrong track. My bad. Okay, try again. Okay, so that wasn't a very good recording, but the principle is that you can record movements of parameters as automation in the software. Now I have this automation curve. And I can start writing or drawing my patterns. I can start doing things that might be difficult to do on the hardware side. I like it actually. Yeah, and that can also, of course, be done in the arrangement, and you can do longer recordings. This is just a very short loop. And, of course, as we looked at earlier, we also have the possibility to modulate stuff with our eminent modulation system. So I'm gonna reset the button here. Actually, let me kill the automation so we don't get any interference. Now, in my CV out module, I'm gonna again open up the modulation panel, click the plus button, and let's grab a classic LFO. Again, I can just assign it to anything, in this case, the one knob. Now, this is now free running, but of course I want to tempo sync it. And I have a myriad of different options that I can work with here that may or may not be difficult to achieve in the hardware world. So of course you can sync up LFOs and you can do all sorts of modulations in as hardware, but computers are really good at this stuff, so we can use this and do really advanced stuff. So this is a very basic kind of LFO modulation. And I can combine modulators. So I have the option to add as many or as few as I want. And if I just hit the plus button, I can just keep on adding as many as I want. All the different kinds of modulators. And I can modulate the modulators. So let's try to use the step sequencer to modulate the phase of the LFO. Actually, I'm gonna So that was a very simple example of how you can control stuff with CV out and then bring the audio back in. Another thing that you may want to do is to have audio in Bitwig Studio that we're going to run through analog stuff and back. So let's see if we can bring some example of that. I'm just going to give this guy a rest. And let's see. Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty cool that you have such a cool computer where you can actually paint, so to say, with a pencil automations.
Mm-hmm.
But what if you don't have such a cool thing? Are there other ways to
Yes.
write automations?
Yes.
Like with a mixer or something? Or
Yeah, you can record. Yeah, you can if you have like a Midi controller or if you have. Yeah.
You can do it with the modules.
Also, yeah, but
Yeah, you can do it with the mouse. You can draw curves with the mouse. You
the
can.
mouse, it kind of sucks. Yeah, I just wonder
Yeah.
in other ways what else is possible.
Sure. So let's say you have a MIDI controller with some knobs. You can assign these parameters through a MIDI controller and then record the takes that you do your sweeps with the knobs, things like that.
One more question.
Yeah.
You use the CV from the Bitwig to modulate the racks. Can I, especially with the ES8, can I record CV input because I like analog sequences like the Max Meister and stuff? Just record my jam, save all this automation I do with the sequencers or my LFOs, save it with zero latency, and then automatize what I got, slice it up.
Short answer, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me think. But what you're doing is that you're sending modulation.
Sequences signal to my filter, for example.
Yeah.
Then also to the ES8.
Yeah.
Record the whole session in Bitwig. Then I have a CV automation that I can slice, alter,
Yes. Yes.
differentiate. Oh, perfect. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So I mean,
Thank you.
essentially CV and audio is the same thing.
Yeah.
So you can just record it as audio, and then reuse or misuse or reuse that audio as automation again to send out to your equipment. So I'm just gonna grab a random audio clip here. That was a bit too bassy, sorry. Need something with a little more grip. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna send this out to the filter, and I'm gonna do some filter effects on it, and then I'm gonna send it back and record it. So I have, let me grab another cable. I'm gonna destroy all my previous work.
Are the modulations recorded on separate tracks that you can assign them later to any other?
Yeah, so the question is if the modulation is recorded into another track or assigned to another track. Yeah, you can assign. Yeah, it would be the same thing. You would record it as audio. Yeah. Or did I understand your question right? Yeah.
So I can use it also for another track later.
In theory, yes. Yeah.
Theory.
In theory. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't know how to do it just straight off the bat, but with some work, it would be possible to set it up.
Now, if you want to use the modulation for later for
Sure.
for another.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you record it as audio, then you have it as audio, which you can then use as a modulation source for anything, in any track, anywhere. So where am I? Yes. I'm just gonna create a very simple routing here, and let me explain. I'm sending this to 3 and 4 on my ES8. This is going through the filter here and then going back as 3 and 4 input. I'm gonna add a separate audio track and choose 3 and 4 here. So we should get some audio here. It's a bit low. So now I have very easy control and very easy way to kind of analogify my digital stuff, because a lot of people like the analog sound, but they like the convenience of working in the box, and this way you can combine both worlds. Of course, nothing is stopping us from doing the same old trick that I showed you earlier of just creating a bit of animation. Again, I'm gonna just go ahead and assign some modulation to the filter. And on the topic of this not being Midi, I'm gonna do some audio rate modulation. I'm adding excuse me, an LFO modulator, and I'm gonna set it to work in the kilohertz range, and I'm gonna assign it to the cutoff of the filter. And this is something that I use a lot in my music because it gives this really otherworldly tonality. And you can have a lot of fun with different timbres with this. Of course, when you modulate modulators, it gets even more interesting. So let's add a random one and start randomizing the speed of the LFO. Yeah, you get the idea.
I have a question.
Yes?
What's the kind of latency you're getting there?
So this is all running in the audio realm, right? So it depends on the latency you have for your audio settings. So if we jump into the audio settings here, I'm currently running at 128 samples audio buffer. This of course depends on your setup. If you have a strong machine that can do a low latency, but I mean there shouldn't be any mismatch between what's happening here and here because it's all in the same domain, which is the audio domain. Is that answered?
I guess more or less.
Yeah.
I suppose if you're sending the clocks out, then it would be synchronized. But if you were running a sequencer externally, then the latency would probably affect it, right? Because they wouldn't be exactly in sync.
Yeah, I mean it's analog, so you will have some, you know, some kind of imperfections, I guess. But in theory, it should be pretty perfect. You might have to set it and do some tweaking, but it should be synced up. I mean that's way better than Midi. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Let's say I already have an audio interface. Can I still use that thing you're having there to connect it to a modular synthesizer?
Yine. It depends. If you have this connects via light pipe. So if you have like an ADAT in out,
that's great.
then you can use this as a pure extension of the audio interface you have.
That means I can stack them up.
Yes.
Like I can use more of these things.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes.
Cool.
So it would be, in this case, you could have two connected, and then you would have 16 out and 8 in. There's also a new model, the ES9 from Expert Sleepers, which has more in and outs. So check it out. Yeah.
Another question.
Yes, please.
When you're doing the software kind of modulations before on the filter, can you apply those LFOs to the clock rate, or is the clock rate fixed once you hit play?
I'm not sure what you mean by clock rate in this setup.
You were sending an analog clock.
Yeah.
Expert sleepers to fire the sequencer, I think.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So inside Bitwig, can you assign an LFO or a square wave to the clock
Yes.
rate
Yes.
so that the sequencer doubles or halves?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Yeah.
and that's a lot of fun. You can get really interesting effects and really wonky rhythms. If I better hurry up so I have time to show all these stuff, but that's actually on my agenda or my to-do list for today. So actually now haven't even touched how to play notes from Bitwig Studio on this. So that might be the logical next example. Again, removing all the dirty stuff here to have some kind of a blank slate. So I'm going to show how to send out notes, because this is a sequencer after all, and control like a synth voice, an analog synth voice from within Bitwig Studio. We're going to start in the software. I've got a new blank project. I'm going to add, again, open up the pop-up browser, adding what's called the CV instrument. So this is our device to send out note information to the hardware. And first I have to define my pitch and my gate outputs. So I'm going to set pitch to output 3. And that goes into the 1 volt per octave input on the oscillator. My gate out is number 4. And this triggers the envelope, which in turn opens the VCA, which I realized that I haven't even connected yet. So let's do that quickly. Of course, via the filter. because that's what synthesizer is all about. And bringing up, where are you? Bringing up the on-screen keyboard, we should be getting some. So on and so forth. So we need a backing track, of course. I like these things. Let's get something. I hope I find something. Oh, that's a bit too drastic. Yeah, did we already have that? Let's play this guy or girl. Okay, so I need to do some tweaking. Whoa. So, as you can see, I can instantly play the voice from my keyboard. Just gonna got a silly note clip going on. Here you'll see funny looking lines, and this is the pitch, the micro pitch information that I did with the pitch slides. So if you have a MIDI controller that does MPE or whatever, this stuff gets recorded here, so you can do all sorts of funny sweeps. I was gonna quantize this, but I don't think it's necessary because it's, yeah, whatever. Stop. Now, of course, analog oscillators, they don't know what a note is. They just get some kind of voltage and they don't know what to play. They just play whatever they can. So one thing that we should do is to tune the oscillator. I'm going to use another output from my oscillator and patch it back into Bitwig Studio. I have an available input here. And before I do that, let's bring down the volume. So we're now feeding back the audio into Bitwig Studio, so we can start the tuning process by hitting the button. Bitwig Studio plays, I believe, 10 octaves or something and analyzes what comes in, so it can create this kind of curve that we'll see soon. Bim. Okay, that's it. I'm gonna undo this and we play again. Let's hear. Much better, right? Now, having this note clip, I can do all the things that you usually do in a sequencer. You can add notes, you can do edits, you can cut out parts. But just to save time, I'm gonna more or less leave it as it is. And if I want to record this, of course, I do the thing that I usually do. It's a bit low, but yeah, you get the idea. So I can now capture my takes as audio and so on and so forth. And that's essentially it. That's a very easy way to, you know, integrate your synth voice or whatever you have into Bitwig Studio. But that's only the most simple voice you can imagine. I've already showed you how to modulate stuff, so actually let's do that some more. This time I'm gonna use an output from my audio interface as some FM action and open up my device chain again, add a CV out device. Where are you? There you go. It's number 5. Add another modulator, and you probably guessed what's gonna happen next. Do some FMing. maybe I don't want the full amount of FM all the time. Maybe I just want it to begin with, or the other way around. So I'm gonna add an envelope to the amount of the LFO. Yeah, it's a bit hard to hear, but that's the general idea. We also have a bunch of note effects. We have, for instance, arpeggiators, note repeaters, note echoes, all sorts of different things. I'm gonna load a clip onto this, which has some chord. Actually, let me grab a long chord. Yeah, let's grab this one, because the notes are too short to hear. Okay, I just loaded this note clip playing, a polyphonic note clip playing the monophonic synth voice. Never mind that. That's only because I want to, as a next step, activate an arpeggiator. So using all the devices at our hand, we can do a lot of creative things and do a lot of things that might be hard or even impossible to do in here. I'll bring down the gate length. And I'm gonna add a note echo. So maybe I wanna bring it up one octave. And one earlier question was if you could modulate the clock. So let's actually show that by modulating the arpeggio rate. Let me grab this LFO. Let's try this, but I want to have it much slower. And I'm gonna assign it to the speed. Yeah, makes sense. So that's scratching the surface of how you can work with notes to play synth voices in the Eurorec world. So it's already been almost an hour, so I'm gonna go into the grid for a while, a short while. I'm not sure how much time we have left. I'm gonna open up a new project, again blank slate, and I'm gonna show you the grid quickly what it is. So the grid is, like I said, a modular sound design environment that lives in two different devices. One is an instrument, and one is an audio effect. And opening it up quickly, it's okay. You can get an idea on what it can do. So it's a workspace where you can build synthesizers, build effects, build drum machines, and all sorts of things. I'm not going to dive into that because we're running out of time. So I'm just going to show you how you can control stuff in the hardware world using modules that are available here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to destroy the patch here, destroy everything, and start out with a completely blank slate. We already have a synth voice set up, so I'm going to use that to show my next thing. I am going to grab a CV output module, and I'm gonna create a tiny little gate sequence. And this is now connected to number 4. So we should get some. I'm gonna add some pitch, because this is only gate. I'm gonna add a secondary output to control pitch. This is of course number 3, already patched up. Gotta love this default sound. Ominous. Since we already have one more oscillator, we might as well use that as well. I'm gonna set up a secondary voice. Let's use this. This is too long. 5 and 6. Won't be long now. So, almost done. Add another CV out. I believe this is number 6 to open the gate. Actually, let's add the pitch and use the same. And this is number 5. So the reason I'm doing this is because I want to show you how time works in the grid. We use phase, which is essentially a waveform, a ramp waveform, going from 0 to 1, and anything in between is the timing. So 1 bar might be 1 cycle, and you can modify how that curve looks in very interesting ways. And I'm gonna highlight one of the gate sequences. You see up here to the left, you'll see the timing as a waveform that's ramping up. And what I like to do is mess up and create weird rhythms. So I'm gonna just insert something in between the phase input let's see. I'm gonna use, first I'm gonna show bend maybe. What I'm doing now is I'm bending the phase curve that controls the timing. Which is a good demonstration of why it's cool to work with phase instead of just working with a pulse, because with pulses you can't really achieve these kind of results. I can insert a mirror module instead, which, as the name implies, mirrors the phase signal. So it will first go forward and then go backwards. I can reverse, of course, and I can do all sorts of interesting things. So shift will kind of shift the phase, and that's really fun to modulate. So I'm gonna go ahead and add an LFO. Sorry if I'm being a bit quick here, not explaining everything. I'm just gonna go ahead, yeah? this is the kind of music that kids listen to these days. I don't know. And God damn. Actually, let's bring down the tempo. Yeah, so that's what I'm doing all days long. I'm just creating weird rhythms by bending time, which is a lot of fun. I think we have time for one more thing, maybe, if I'm quick. Or maybe which one should I take? Which one should I pick? Yeah, okay. This one, okay. So I'm gonna open up the grid again. And I'm gonna play, the audio is only happening in the digital world, so it's only coming from the grid, but I'm gonna modulate it using hardware. So I'm just gonna clean up this mess that I left behind from a minute ago. Bear with me for a second. Oy. I have a hardware LFO here. So this is a pingable quad LFO, I believe it's called, from 4MS. Yes, quad pingable LFOs, that's right here. So this I'm gonna send into, actually, I'm gonna free myself of this, into the grid. And I'm gonna control the oscillator pitch by CV in, and that's number 1, sending it here. I'm just gonna create a little gate thing happening to open up. Oof. So that's pretty boring. Just controlling the pitch, very basic, very straightforward. Let me actually add a filter here so we don't get too loud. No, this one. And I'm gonna set up a bunch of ways to manipulate the signal coming in that controls the pitch of the oscillator. Make sense? Yeah. Let's first, because I've done this before, I need to have an attenuator to bring down the signal. I'm gonna add a semitone quantizer in between. Now we're starting to hear stuff, yeah? If you make this slower. Of course, I want to sync up the LFO, so let me just create that real quickly. Add a clock out. Output number 3, that's my ping signal to the LFO to behave. I'm not playing. Too fast. Sound is a bit naked. For our listening pleasure, I'm going to add a reverb. Whoa. And let's add some shapers to further destroy the signal. Let's try here. Okay, a bit too fast, a bit too crazy. Add it here instead. No? Okay. Yeah, so essentially the grid is just full of little ways to manipulate signals in different ways, if it's coming from inside the software or if it's coming from outside in the hardware world. And yeah, that was a very basic example. I think we're gonna end now. It's been an hour, and I've shown you the weirdest examples that I have. And yeah, that's it for my. And maybe before you start, maybe some questions. Any open questions? No? All good? Yeah.
Can we create our own modules in the grid? No? That would be super cool.
Not yet.
Let's leave it at not yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we should be able to encapsulate them because there are so many applications where this would be really helpful.
Yes, perhaps. Yeah. Okay, so that's it from me. Thank you very much for coming. It was a pleasure.